Welcome back to the Swing State Podcast. Today we're diving into one of the quietest but probably most consequential forces that have been shaping American politics, gerrymandering. Gerrymandering refers to the practice of drawing electoral district lines in ways that can influence which party is more likely to win seats. And it's kind of been a recurring feature of U.S. politics for more than 2 centuries. The term itself dates back to 1812 when Massachusetts approved a state senate map with a district that looked like a salamander, prompting critics to coin the word gerrymander, which has kind of stuck ever since. Since 2025, though, that old practice has taken on a lot of new urgency. Several states have redrawn their congressional maps in the middle of the decade outside the usual 10-year redistricting cycle. Texas, Missouri, North Carolina all passed new maps that altered the partisan balance of their delegation, prompting waves of litigation and really reshaping the playing field for the 2026 midterms. In Texas, a federal court initially struck down the new map, citing claims of racial discrimination, but the Supreme Court recently ruled that Texas can keep using the 2025 map this November, effectively allowing the state's mid-decade redistricting to stand. At the same time, states like California and Virginia have adjusted their redistricting frameworks in different directions. California voters passed Prop 50, which mandates a new mid-decade congressional map projected to shift several additional seats towards Democrats, reinforcing the state's role as a hotspot for mid-cycle redistricting changes. In Virginia, a ballot measure approved in 2026 gives the legislature, currently controlled by Democrats, redistricting authority now through 2030, replacing the state's previous bipartisan commission setup. Meanwhile, Florida is now putting together a new map through its legislature, adding another front in what's become a nationwide contest over how district lines are drawn and how these decisions really ripple through representation and elections. I think all of this kind of pushes us towards a bigger question about the rules of the game. In a system where voters are supposed to choose their representatives, how much should these very representatives be able to shape the districts that elect them? I think some people argue that mid-decade map changes and aggressive line drawing are simply the legal exercise of normal political power, and others see them as fundamental challenges to fair representation. One that may eventually call for new guardrails, reform, or even constitutional amendments. So, with that being said, Eric, Armand, what's your guys' take on all of this?
Yeah, I think, you did a really good job summarizing the current landscape, but honestly, I absolutely hate all of the gerrymandering that's been going on in this election cycle, regardless if it's Republican or Democrat. And I know that the push has been highly partisan. Right? So the original gerrymandering push for this cycle started in Texas due to President Trump arguing that, Texas needed to basically gerrymander some of their congressional districts to shore up the Republican vote in the House of Representatives. On a policy standpoint, obviously I'd be happy with more Republicans in the House, but I don't think that gerrymandering is the way to do that. And it just comes down to the philosophy of what our representative democracy is, right? People should be represented by people in your community. I mean, if you look at California under Prop 50, currently the 2nd Congressional District, which is currently just Marin and up north on the coast, now will encompass Marin, the coast, and parts of rural Lassen and Siskiyou counties. Like, these are communities that have nothing in common, and they're going to be represented by someone who doesn't share their same values and is going to be pushing and voting for legislation that no one really agrees with from those parts of from Northern California. So I hate it. I don't think it's a good idea. But I mean, I guess this is just the current political landscape. We're hyper-partisan. And right now, the main point in politics is just to get as many voters to vote for your candidate to basically shore up your majority in the House of Representatives. So I don't support it. Like I said, I don't support it with any state, not with Virginia, not with Florida, not with any of this. I hope that there's new legislation that will eventually curb this, because I don't think it's good for our country as a whole going forward. I think this is a slippery slope and is not how politics and our democracy should be divvied up.
Yeah, Eric, so I completely agree. I think that gerrymandering as a concept has completely negatively affected our democracy in terms of allowing for both sides, the GOP and the Democratic Party, to negatively or to adjust in their favor. I think one thing that we do have to keep in mind is gerrymandering, specifically political leaning, adjustments or redistricting, has primarily been on the GOP side. States like California and Michigan have created independent commissions to allow for exactly this to not happen, where 2 Democrats or an equal number of Democrats and Republicans are on the committee, plus an independent representative, and they build the maps properly over the 10-year time or over this time span and have it happen once every 10 years. this whole thing started, and this whole chaos and increase of gerrymandering started because of, like you said, Trump's pressure on Texas to redistrict. Not just Texas, multiple other states. Texas took it upon themselves to do so. And like Adarsh mentioned in the earlier context, right, the Supreme Court of Texas said that this was a racially charged gerrymandering, which there's a lot of evidence to point to that. And it went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, which then what they said was, no, not that it wasn't racial, but simply that we're not going to. They stayed the legislation or stayed the decision to simply, say that we're going to wait until after the 2026 elections because it's too close to the election. So it's something to think about, that this might not be something that stays for long, especially after the 2026 elections, based off of what the Supreme Court said. Now, one thing I also want to mention is California and Virginia, both of their kind of props that have just passed are shorter term props. They're not getting rid of the independent commissions. They're doing that for like a point in time to allow for the adjustment, the kind of against the defense of the equality within the House of Representatives for Democrats. I think one of the big things that Michelle Obama has said time and time again is when they go low, we go higher. Mm-hmm. And I think the Democrat adjustment of the statement, especially during the Trump era, has been when they go low, we go smarter. Because at this point, fighting back fairly has just not worked within the Trump era. And now you're seeing that. And so Governor Gavin Newsom saw and recognized that ultimately, if the Democrats didn't step up their game, they would be in a deep situation in 2026 as well. So they tried to go against that. And so I have some level of respect and understanding for that. I do think that some sort of national legislation that creates independent commissions for all states would be interesting to look at.
Well, I want to push back a little when you say, they go low, we play smart. It's no, when they go low, we go even lower. Because let's not forget, gerrymandering, this cycle may have started with Texas, but there are plenty of states and state legislatures, run by Democrats that have been completely gerrymandered before, right? Illinois, probably the best example. Maryland also, there's only one Republican congressional seat. It's all the way in the far east, I believe. And then, for example, in Nevada, their state legislature is completely gerrymandered. All of Clark County and Las Vegas is gerrymandered. You saw this in, I believe it was the 2020 election. I think the Republicans in the state legislature actually had a majority of the votes, but I think they only got 40% of the seats, and that's mainly due to the gerrymandering in the South. I think it's unfair to only or mainly put the blame on Texas, because this has been a problem for decades. And I think we might both disagree on the root cause, but at the end of the day, there needs to be some sort of legislation, I think, that makes sure that this doesn't continue, right? One congressman from California, Kevin Kiley, he did introduce a bill to ban mid-cycle redistricting. Ironically, his district was targeted by the Prop 50 gerrymander in California, but still, the actual idea, I think, is very smart. It hasn't gone anywhere. I don't even think it's left committees. I don't think anything is going to actually happen from this legislation, but these are good ideas that the public should be supporting, because it's clear if you just gerrymander every single state, which is how I think it's going to go, and eventually if you start gerrymandering every single state legislature as well, like the state House of Reps and the state Senate, this is just going to be an absolute disaster for representation across our country. Like I said, I don't think anything is going to actually change with any of the legislation on the congressional level, but it's good to see at least there's some push to ban this, because we can't just give up and let this be the status quo.
Yeah, and I completely agree there too. I think using this as a political strategy, like initially, even when it was started, right, was meant to be, we'll discuss privately, maybe make some decisions and try to do something. It was a lot more like low key than it is now. Like now it's like everywhere, and it's used a lot more nonchalantly than it should have been. And I think the other argument here too is, right, like, why is Trump doing this? And I think for him, he's thinking of himself obviously not as just the president of the country, but also like a leader of his party, right? And from that perspective, he's going to want to do everything he can to unify his party, and at the same time deliver on the promises that he pushed out to his supporters, right? I think he campaigned on a platform that honestly included securing control of Congress to fulfill his agenda. And, I think this has been his proactive way of doing that. And I think it's definitely sad to see that it's becoming so hyper, divisive, because I think ultimately, like, that's going to be a major issue. Like, if you want to move to, like, a red state or a blue state, mind you, like, you ultimately do want to have some form of diversity of ideas, regardless of if it's just, a little bit. You still want that to be there so you can have some level of discourse and just good conversations and learn from one another. And I think by creating these kind of quote unquote, I guess, safer districts, they're not really like, the party's not rigging the process. They're really just insulating themselves from like volatile election cycles, which really shouldn't be the main purpose of using this. I think one interesting point I'd like to bring up, and I think, so the last census was done, pre-COVID, right? So I think one thing that I think we can probably all agree on, at least in the last 5 years, is that there's been a lot of movement from, left-leaning states to right-leaning states. Just a lot of commotion in general. So do you think that that might warrant a secondary take at, an election map during the middle of the year, just because there have been more people moving and the demographics have shifted considerably versus how they have been in the past?
Yeah, I think the only, need to do that would be if you adjust the census to occur, every 5 years instead of every 10. I think as of right now, you should just honestly keep it for every 10 years. I think that's honestly probably fair. And, you kind of want to get a whole, overarching aggregate data for population movement. But I mean, in California, I'm all for not electing, Democrat members of Congress to the House of Representatives. I'm all for that. But like I said, gerrymandering, I don't think is the way to do it. But the only, side benefit from the exodus from California is California is going to lose congressional seats in the House. So I believe from 2010 to 2020, I believe they lost 3 seats. So, I mean, if we continue to see the exodus from blue states, it actually might negate some of the gains that they're going to make from redistricting. So I'm happy about that. I encourage, right? California, I guess, just keep doing what you're doing, because you're causing people to leave and then you're going to lose more seats in Congress. I mean, doesn't seem like a very smart, political play, but I mean, I wouldn't go to California as the model for good political strategy going forward. So unless you keep having people leave, then we might actually have control and we can actually bring it back to the Independent Redistricting Commission. Because I mean, you say it's temporary, Armand, but there's no shot they're going to let that be temporary. It's a done deal.
I disagree. I think that they know what's right. I think that's the difference you have to keep in mind, that you were mentioning, Illinois and Maryland and whatnot. I agree. Those are very fair cases where, there has been significant gerrymandering on the Democratic side. But from an overall national scale, there are 19 net positive GOP seats due to gerrymandering than Democrats. And it's just significantly different. And California knows how to do it properly. That's why they created the Independent Commission. That's why they did. Get rid of it.
Until they get rid of it, right?
No, they didn't get rid of it. They literally created a point in time where they're going to adjust it, and they gave a rationale for it. And they did it as a defense mechanism.
Because
and it was completely asymmetrical from what happened in Texas. And I think that's what you have to keep in mind, where Virginia and California were examples of defensive gerrymandering for a purpose that the 60% of California supported in the election. And I think that's something that you just have to keep in mind, that I do think that California, these states that are Democrat owned, I truly believe that they're willing to go back to an independent coalition immediately, as soon as this kind of adjustment period is fixed, And I agree that I think that there is an exodus from blue states. I don't think that means that we should adjust the frequency at which the census occurs. I think it's good that we do it every 10 years. It keeps consistency, within Congress, within just all of our institutions. It also is less money, which is important. But I think that what is important to think about is how to figure out how to make this fair consistently over time, longer term, So, I mean, my question to you guys is, what would you propose as legislation for adjustments to gerrymandering? Should there be legislation that exists nationally, or, as Eric likes to say, every state for themselves, What do you think?
Well, I mean, look, I'm torn on this, because I think there should be, federal legislation to basically put some guardrails on this process. My only concern is the 2019 SCOTUS case that basically said, legislatures are not allowed, courts are not allowed to basically, put in restrictions on, congressional maps, and that it's up to the state legislatures. So basically from that decision, I would infer, okay, it specifically mentions state legislatures. So does that mean that Congress is not allowed to basically regulate these type of gerrymandering and map drawing, capabilities? The court hasn't really mentioned that. I don't think anyone's really provided a true answer on what that means, but I think the first step would definitely be to pass some, congressional legislation and then let the courts play it out, because as is right now, there is no answer. And I would much rather go down the rabbit hole of trying to figure this out, because I think the state legislatures on their own, it's too, they need some guardrails. And so like I said, I like California's Independent Redistricting Commission. Obviously they threw it out or temporarily suspended it. Odds are it's going to be thrown out in my opinion. But yeah, I think for right now, the only real solution to even begin looking at is some type of congressional legislation.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's what you have to do, but the question I have is like, how do you why would you ever trust someone in office to basically make decisions? It's a decision that directly impacts them too, right? And their quote unquote job. And I think that's the kind of issue I have with it, which is why I do actually like this narrative of independent commissions, because I do think that does solve some of the issues that we're talking about, right? Like it makes it so that A, you don't have skin in the game that you're talking about, and then B, I also think it's a good idea to involve the people, right? But at the end of the day, I don't think that this can be something that is kicked back to the states. I do think there needs to be some sort of national regulation, just because otherwise I think it's impacting a lot of things federally too that I think needs to be considered.
Yeah, I would even say, I think state legislatures need to pass, if I was in their state legislature, to pass statutes that basically, at the very least, keep what I would consider communities of interest together. Like, I love using California as an example because the redistricting is just so egregious. But I don't think someone in Sacramento has really anything in common with someone in the Central Valley or the Sierra foothills. And this is what the map looks like. So at the very least, you want to keep communities of interest together instead of splitting them up. I think that is the basic, most common sense type of reform to map drawing that I can think of. So I'm fine if that comes from the state legislature. Fine if that comes from Congress. But at the very least, I think that's the easiest solution. Just keep communities of interest together. You don't need these snaking, overarching, splitting up districts that are crossing suburban, urban, and rural areas. I think it's absolutely ridiculous and insane.
Yep, I agree. I think, it's not necessarily having the federal government decide what the districts look like in each of the states, but it's about creating the guardrails, requiring every state to have a independent redistricting commission, that is fair, that focuses on transparency. That's one of the biggest things about these commissions that exist today is they have increased public hearings. They have ways for you to see the data, for you to understand why the commission picked what is happening, the way the districting is existing, And so if we create legislation nationally that states that every state has to have an independent districting commission, that would allow for hopefully more fairness within the elections and hopefully more ability for swing states, and more adjustments based off of the people and what they want, based off of the stats. Out of the 19 swing seats in the last election, 12 of them came from independently redistricted commission gerrymandered areas, which just showcases that they're doing it properly, that they're providing increased ability for people to show up to elections, right? You're getting more voter turnout. And so it's clearly working. There's examples of it working. It's just it'll be maximized if we have the entire country involved in something like this.
Yeah, and who actually supports this? This is the most bipartisan idea ever. Do we know anybody here that likes this type of policy?
Well, you tell me. This law has been put out on Congress by Democrats repeatedly, over and over again, exactly as I've stated it today. And it has not been passed because of Republicans.
Who is trying to ban mid-cycle redistricting?
It's not mid-cycle.
Kevin Colley.
Kevin Colley.
It's not a mid-cycle redistricting. They're not even down for the concept of just having independent commissions.
I don't see any single Democrat co-sponsoring this bill or supporting the idea of banning mid-cycle redistricting. The only one I see is Kevin Colley. and who is a Republican. The only reason he's an independent now is to gain support in his district, which is like D+8 now. But for all the talk of Democrats saying, "Oh, we're trying to, counter the GOP and we stand for these values," I don't see anyone doing anything to ban this. I just see, oh, let's just redistrict and get more seats.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, we basically, I guess we gave you the excuse to go ahead and do it first, right? You have plausible deniability, you didn't start it, but I mean, in fact, you have Illinois and Maryland and some of the other state legislatures. I mean, I'm not pointing fingers at you, but I'm just saying, like, the only person is Republican trying to ban this.
Wait. I don't think you understand what I said. Democrats have multiple times since 2019, 4 specific times they got really close to creating the law that says no. These are
not single.
These are
policies.
The Freedom to Vote Act was fully focused on national anti-gerrymandering standards, uniform voting across, and access protections. It was fully focused on gerrymandering, and it was passed in the House under Democratic control, blocked in the Senate. Same thing for the second one in 2021. Another one came out in 2021.
None of these just ban mid-cycle redistricting. These are all.
It's not about. I'm not talking about mid-cycle redistricting. I'm talking about having election committees.
This is the pure one we want to support right now.
But also, I mean, you can make the argument that like even all of these like prop votes is like somewhat of you're just shifting. The Democrats are just shifting the narrative of like how you're redrawing the map. Like you're still redrawing the map in like a way that you're not supposed to, right? And I think it's just you're reframing it and marketing it differently. It's the same concept at the end of the day. Like, I think both people are doing the same thing.
No, one is very clearly an adjustment and defensive, and one is very much offensive.
Yeah, but they're both playing the game. They're both playing the game. That's the point we're trying to make.
One also has guardrails within their own legislation, and one was racially targeted. Like,
yeah, but the guardrails were thrown out. But weren't the guardrails thrown out to implement this? That's the point.
No, what I mean is, if you read the legislation, it's not saying get rid of the independent commission. It's saying pause it for 4 years so that we can put a pin in this situation and then bring it back. It's not get rid of it completely. It's not from now on forever we can do it. No, it's a short-term pause. Whereas Texas adjustments were let's do it, no guardrails, nothing. It was just let's change it.
But you're telling me that if there's precedent if there's precedent for a short-term pause, you can't just short-term pause it again? Like that you can,
I'm
right?
saying that California has California has time and time again. Michigan has time and time again proven that they're not about that. They don't play that game. They play what's beneficial for the entire state.
There's no shot.
Okay? And also, just to clarify, 4 Democrats currently have proposed a anti-midterm redistricting bill. Joey Lofgren from California, Alex Padilla, the senator from California, Raphael Warnock from Georgia, Democrat, and Don Davis from North Carolina. So there are plenty of Democrats who are anti-mid-decade gerrymandering.
So why have they not co-sponsored or signed on?
I just said they did. I literally just said that.
I thought you said they introduced their own legislation.
No, they're working on adjusting it right now, and they've proposed it for people.
We need more than that. It's not enough.
Get your people in line, bro. My people are working hard, dude. Like, my people are working hard. I just don't know.
And I guess coming in from today, Governor Ron DeSantis unveiled a proposed congressional map that could shift Florida's delegation from 20 to 8 to 24 to 4 in favor of Republicans. He's been targeting Democrat-leaning districts in Tampa, Orlando, and South Florida. And, I think the Republican-controlled legislature is set to fast-track this plan tomorrow. So maybe let's talk about what we think about that and maybe what states are going to be coming next. I think we're definitely going to be seeing some sort of legal firestorm in Florida, but, what do we think is coming up?
Yeah, so I definitely think this is going to get immediately challenged. I mean, every time a state does this, there's an immediate legal challenge. It's sometimes there's a stay, sometimes not. But honestly, this is probably going to pass as expected. Like you said, there's probably, I think, +4 GOP seats. I think one of those might be a toss-up, but let's just assume there's 4. I think if you actually look across all of the current gerrymandered maps, it's actually pretty even. There might be like +1 Dem or +1 GOP in the aggregate. So what this means is there's probably going to be more. So I think the next states up are probably going to be Georgia and Louisiana. Georgia, I think, will definitely pass, right? That's a Republican-controlled state house, state senate, and Brian Kemp as the governor. He's more of a moderate, so I'm not exactly sure if it's actually as a done deal as, Florida with DeSantis. But then Louisiana, I mean, this has always been kind of ground zero for redistricting, just because some of the maps in Louisiana kind of fall under the Voting Rights Act maps. So we're going to have to see how SCOTUS kind of rules against Louisiana's use of the VRA. Maybe they're going to throw it out, maybe not. But those are kind of the two immediate states, I think. And then, from looking at the map, Kansas might be another one. State House, State Senate, but the governor is a Democrat, Laura Kelly. So again, it might not be as a done deal as you might expect because, right, deep red Kansas, you would just assume that this will be passed. It remains to be seen. Right off the bat, Georgia and Kansas, we're just going to have to wait and see. But, Louisiana, we're going to have to see what the courts say. So, yeah, definitely still an ongoing fight. After those states are in play, probably going to be other states as well. So it's probably a never-ending battle until every state is completely gerrymandered. So that's at least what I think is going to happen.
Yeah, no, I think for Kansas, they had the governor, Laura Kelly. I think Republicans have tried to bring it forward through a special session, but she's vetoed it, I think, before. And Indiana, too, they've tried to turn some of these Democrat-held districts into Republican strongholds, but there's just been no movement there in the Senate. And I think it's interesting to see what's happening, and I think Georgia will be an interesting one for sure, especially given how close it was last year and years prior. But I do think, going back to, I think, what we were saying before, it'll be nice to be able to see. The one thing that I feel like I personally have always liked about elections is the swing states, and I think the more and more kind of divisive we get in this kind of context, the less and less of that we're going to see. I think, we'll see how some of the other states play out and go from there.
Yeah, I agree. I think that one of the biggest values and benefits of the swing, of fair districting, is the outcome of swing states and being adjusted. And that's kind of what makes things interesting, what makes things fun, what makes things real, and showcasing having these people in the House actually be representatives of the states that they're around. I do think that the time is running out for 2026. I think that Florida, it's going to have to go very, very quickly. The courts are not going to have to block it. In best case scenario, I think you might be able to get it for 2026. I don't think it'll last after 2026 because there are some pretty strong redistricting laws already in place in Florida. But I think that you're absolutely right, Eric. Slowly, as based off of the midterm elections, we're going to see an adjustment one way or another for many states to go through before the general election in 2028.
I think the worst part is this removes all the suspense. I like seeing, on election day how these districts are going to vote, right? It actually is interesting. Yeah. It's already a foregone conclusion, and this is pretty boring stuff. So yeah, at least, at the very least, the excitement, keeps things interesting. So hopefully that means something to the people drawing the maps.
Yeah, 100%. You bring up a good point, Eric, and I think that the other coalition that's being formed is the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, which is basically saying that your entire state's electoral votes will go to the popular vote winner. The problem is that if gerrymandering continues at this rate, we're going to see gerrymandering determining presidential elections as well, which is even more problematic as well. So I think that we really have to keep that in mind. There's 22 states right now covering 209 or so electoral votes. And so there are a few states who are putting it out into the ballot this coming midterm election. I think it's a very real possibility. The electoral college is, not loved by most people. And so a popular vote election would be something that I think people would favor. But it's something very interesting that's kind of coming alongside this very shortly.
Yeah, I think for that, my biggest thing is, I think, two things, really. I think, one, there's just a general kind of lack of, uniformity across states in terms of how elections are run. Some states have ranked choice voting, some states just have completely different, voter ID requirements, ballot access, etc. And so I think, from that perspective, I think it just kind of complicates a lot of the voting procedure. And then, secondarily, too, I think Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution states that no states can enter into an agreement or compact with another state without the explicit consent of Congress, right? So I think this makes it so that I think it would have to be like a congressional, like national legislation that's passed to be able to kind of go around it the other way. And I think it really just messes with the electoral process in the way that it was intended to be.
Yeah, I mean, I don't support this at all. Like the electoral college, like it's not supposed to be a popular vote thing. It was specifically designed to encompass a popular vote and a state vote, right? That's how you get the votes for the electoral college in each state. It's the Senate plus the amount of congressional seats you have. So I definitely don't support this, and I just think you shouldn't just change the rules because your side is losing.
It's funny that you say that, Eric, but all I can say to you is the national election, what is ideally won by national popular vote. I know that's not what was started by the electoral college, and that's not what the founders what the Constitution was written on, but it's clear now more and more that gerrymandering is negatively affecting how state maps are drawn. You're seeing impacts that are far beyond what the initial writers of the Constitution wanted. The national popular vote has worked many times, time and time again, and has showcased what the people want. And so legislation that allows for showcasing what the people want, at least for the presidential election, is something that's so critical in this day and age, because it really truly showcases the net population of America rather than just allowing for certain states to have some extra votes for equality purposes or for adjustment purposes. I think this is truly the most equal. But I know we can go into this quite significantly, maybe in a different episode further. But Adarsh, do you want to end it off for us today?
Yeah, no, I think it's been a good conversation talking about gerrymandering. I think we've been pretty aligned, generally speaking, which has been good. And I think it'll be good for us to kind of just keep our eyes out to see what Florida's going to be doing, and see if any other states kind of get into the game here, which we obviously cannot rule out. So I'm sure we'll be back to kind of discuss this in the future, especially as the midterms kind of gain a little bit more heat. But with that, hope you guys have enjoyed, and we'll see you guys next week.